Hello guys and welcome to the Spin the Wheel Doctor Who podcast. This is episode 6 or 7, I have no idea anymore. Today I have two very special guests with me. I have George Poupart and Joe Deacon. How are you guys?
Well, thanks. Thanks for having us on.
No worries. Now George, we kind of quote unquote met in very weird circumstances compared to our other guests on here where I've just met on Twitter. We met on Letterboxd, interestingly, when I just come across one of your reviews. It's such a very weird way to kind of find each other. But what's the last movie you logged out of interest? I'm really curious.
Oh man, it could have been Bo Burnham's, Inside.
Yeah, I've never seen that.
Really?
No.
I recommend it. I'm kind of obsessed with it at the moment.
Okay.
I've watched it 3 times.
Oh wow.
In the past week, which is probably a bit too much, but
it's never too much for a movie. I've watched about Captain Phillips about 10 times, so that goes to show. But yeah, Joe, you're George's mate in real life. I understand.
Yes.
Is that true? Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So George just recommended you, and then you were on separate episodes originally, and then I thought, let's merge it together for a bit of fun. Why not? The wheel spun, and it landed on. Well, it actually landed on Countryside, the Torchwood episode, which wasn't actually one of my picks. It was one of yours, and then you guys said, no, I don't want.
I just want to say I'm very sorry. Sorry if that caused any confusion. It's just that me and George with Torchwood, we're not that kind of knowledgeable about the whole thing. Like George, you've only seen the first series of Torchwood, haven't you? I've seen more, but it's with Doctor Who, we're so much more kind of well versed in the whole thing. With Torchwood, we're kind of a bit more So sorry about there's any kind of confusion about that.
No, it's fine. I'd argue both episodes are as good as each other. We respun the wheel and it landed on the Mind Throbber. I'm so I'm really surprised you I'm not surprised you didn't watch past Series 1 of Torchwood, because Series 1 of Torchwood is not good compared to Series 2 or 3.
Oh, yeah. To me, Torchwood... to me, Torchwood is like Children of Earth, is that's where the great stuff is at, and most of everything else is is very inconsistent.
I really like Series 2, but Series 1 is a stinky series. But yeah, this isn't Torchwood, this is the Mind Throbber. So general thoughts on this episode going into it, presumably you've seen it before and this is just like a rewatch for you guys. So what was your thoughts going into the episode, the serial before the rewatch?
Well, I remember really liking it, especially the first episode. I would go as far to say that it's probably my favourite episode of Doctor Who ever, the first episode.
Oh wow, okay.
And the others, they're fine. I remember them being fine, but it gets worse as it goes on for me.
Okay, yeah.
I kind of echo your thoughts, George. I remember when because it's the second time I've seen it. I saw it at first about a year ago, and I remember seeing the first episode and really loving it because it was so strange and there was so much tension just in that first episode, and I remember I don't want to say it gets worse as it goes along, implying that episode 5 was bad, because I do think the story as a whole is very strong. Yeah. But I do agree that episode 1 is great. Episode 1 is really, really, really great. But and kind of once you get into episode 2, once you really get into stories happening, it's not as interesting, because the first episode there's so much tension there, which kind of goes a bit as the story progresses.
You see, I'm just going to be an outlier straight away and say the part 1's the weakest one out of all 5. And then,
really?
I think part 2, part 4 and part 5 are all excellent, and then part 1's a bit average, and then part 3's just good. So that I can just go into my first note here. I said part 1 was alright, but didn't capture me as a viewer as well as the other parts did. The Mercury Vapor part and the stuff in the Void was very good, but other than that, some interesting concepts that were implied to be revisited later are not good enough to make an episode on its own good, if that makes sense. Yes, there were some really interesting stuff, but those were going to be revisited later.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. That first episode wasn't really meant to exist. I don't know if you know about this, but the story before the Dominators was meant to be 6 parts.
Yeah.
But but there was scheduling issues. So it had to be 5, which means there was a gap in the schedule. So episodes 2 to 5 of the Mind Robot already existed. Yeah. And the script editor had to quickly write episode 1 to like fill in the slot. So that episode almost didn't exist, and to me, I'm glad it does, because it's the high point of the story. But obviously for you it's the opposite.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
I mean, you can definitely tell it's a bit it hasn't been padded enough because of all the runtimes. The runtimes are really short, and I actually read half hour
strange.
ago that part 5 is the shortest episode of Doctor Who ever. And
really?
I think that kind of shows, because I do think the story at the end is a little bit rushed. Of course, every part got increasingly shorter, but you could definitely tell in part 5 when they resorted to bashing buttons to destroy everything. I think that could have been done far better.
Episode 5, episode 5 to me is the weakest, because to me, like, if I'm like with all the, because it's such a strange story, so much strange things happened, and to me, I think the writer kind of struggled with like how to end it a little bit, because it's just so bizarre, the things that happen. But it's definitely not bad at any point. In fact, I think overall it's a very strong story. But I do agree with George a lot, where kind of each episode kind of gets a little bit weaker.
I don't. Well, of course I do disagree, but I know I'm an outlier here, just because I know from the reaction on IMDb and the reviews on there that each part does get increasingly worse score. So it goes from like an 8.5 down to like a 7.9 by the end. So I can definitely, it's not much of a jump, but you know, if that's your general consensus, then I guess I'm the outlier. But I do think once you actually get into the meat of the story, and I did message you guys yesterday saying it's a very meaty story, so there is quite a lot to talk about, and because to me at least it feels very much like a Moffat era story, which is why I like it. It's just like the complex themes of it.
And it has that kind of like fantasy, kind of like fairy tale sort of aspect of
like
it.
night terrors or something.
Yeah.
Reminded the doll from the toy house.
Yeah, and I think those elements actually were really successful, because I don't know about you guys, but I didn't really like the white robots just as a villain, but I did like the toy soldiers with the key in the back. I think that would definitely fit the theme of like fantasy really well.
Definitely.
Yeah, the white soldiers really stuck out, you know? It's like, you got toy soldiers, why not just use them?
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed really weird to have like two different villains that played very similar roles, you know?
And the toy soldiers just like look better, I think, like, because you can tell the white robots, the effects aren't the best with them, but I think the toy soldiers the toy soldiers just look so much better. So I think, I agree that I think they would have been a better kind of they're better than the white robots. Yeah,
if I can go to TARDIS team now, I really enjoyed the character of Jamie McCrimmon. He's one of my favourite companions of the classic era, and I guess the show overall. What do you guys think of Jamie?
I love Jamie.
I love Jamie. Everyone loves Jamie.
Yeah. Fraser Hines' delivery of the lines were superb, and Hamish Wilson, of course, joined the episode in episode 2 as Hines recovered from chickenpox, and I think he did a really solid job.
That's such a genius way to get around that issue, because Fraser Hines had chickenpox, and like he couldn't be in an episode, and that's such a genius way to just like get rid of his face and have the Doctor replace it and do it wrong. Like it's only this episode you can do that. Like there's no other episode you can get away with that.
And I really like how the Doctor made a couple of jokes about Jamie's nose. Yeah. But yeah, I do think it was a strike of luck. Like, sorry, Hines, I know it was bad that you were ill, but I do really think it added to the story, and Troughton's interactions throughout these entire scenes were gold. And I think, talking about Troughton, I can't say I was a massive fan of him when he was in despair and struggling to stop his companions from exiting the TARDIS and just generally being in despair. But I preferred him in the scenes where he was more authoritative and made deductions, for example in episode 2, where he had to find out the words using the clues. Like he went around and he saw the padlock and stuff like that. I just thought that was fantastic.
The whole story is just him sort of solving problems, and he really shines, I think, in this story. Like, it's one of his best ones. Yeah, I get what you were saying about him sort of moaning, like, "Oh, don't go out into the void" or whatever, and then they just walk out.
Yeah.
You know,
that's kind of trying all over. That's kind of trying all over though, like the bumbly kind of idiot, but then like suddenly he'll just switch and he's this authoritative kind of like really intelligent kind of figure.
Yeah, it's like in Tomb of the Cybermen. I rewatched that one about a week ago, and like he's in the background for a lot of it because the side cast is so vast. Like there's so many side cast members that like the Doctor couldn't breathe so much, so to speak. But then when he was actually given some lines to deliver, I think Troughton was fantastic. And it's not a dig at the actor, it's more so like his inclusion in the story, like how he's written into it. Like Troughton's a fantastic actor. I think he's probably top 5 actors to have ever played the Doctor, if not top 3.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's just when he's not given much to do, like in Tomb of the Cybermen, and in parts of this one, it's like, okay, he's playing this character that I don't particularly like, but then when he's actually the Doctor and making deductions, I love personally.
Yeah. I agree with what you're saying. So Troughton for me is definitely like in the top 5. I just like he's always so entertaining to watch. Like particularly Troughton at this point where he's super comfortable with the role. Because if you go back and watch like Power of the Daleks, for example, you can tell that he's not found his feet yet. But by this point, Troughton just like he just slips into the role so effortlessly.
Yeah,
and him and Jamie, like just great, so great. Like probably my top 3 TARDIS teams, him and Jamie. I like Zoe as well, but Jamie.
Yeah, Zoe's a good addition, but it's really kind of like Troughton and Jamie. That's really kind of where the best dynamic is at.
Yeah, but talking about Zoe, I feel like she was actually given more screaming lines than actual lines of dialogue in this episode, especially in the first 2 parts. She just screams for no reason.
That's a problem with a lot of kind of like classic companions, particularly from that classic female companions, particularly from that era, because all of them were just kind of there to scream. And it's really unfortunate. But like, I do think Zoe is on the better end just of screaming companions, but it can get a bit obnoxious a lot of the time. Particularly like the cliffhanger to episode 1, she's like so loud.
Yeah, talking about part 1, that's actually going to be the screen cap that promotes this video, just because it is very clickbait. If you guys
definitely.
I don't know why they did that camera angle just so low. It's like, what were they trying to get across except from that image? Like, why? But the whole screaming thing was a bit of a turn off, not erotically, but as a character. I do like the scene in the caves where she mentions the equation that dictates the route they should go down. I think that was episode 3, perhaps.
I think so. Like, get out properly,
she does the equation, and I think that was really clever. But I was thinking to myself, would she know that? I mean, the Doctor doesn't, but she would. Like, I was a bit confused. At this point, I think they're trying too hard.
Zoe's often quite... Well, sometimes she's more intelligent than the Doctor, and I like that, you know? I like the Doctor not always being the smartest person in the room. So it kind of gets boring sometimes.
But like, speaking of Zoe, like to me that scene in episode, I think it's episode 4 with was it the carcass? That to me that's the most hilarious scene in the whole story. Where they kind of build up this kind of like character as like with superhuman strength, and he's gonna like rip the Doctor's arms off or something, and she just like beats him no issue, and it's like that's like the most hilarious scene in the whole story.
I love that so much.
It's like this little girl is like beating up this whole this like giant super.
It's so bad that it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's little moments in each episode that just makes it worthwhile, because to get back to your original point that like it gets worse as it goes on, I would still maintain there's at least one scene or several scenes in each episode that just makes it worthwhile, even if some bits weren't as good as the others. There's moments like that where Zoe's just chokeholding this guy who's shouting mercy, and I think that just makes that part of the episode worthwhile, because it's just so it's so good. But the episode itself may not be the best around it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, like in every episode throughout, there are memorable and like great moments. Like it's never, to me, the story is never bad. It's just like it just once you get past like the TARDIS kind of exploding, to me, there's nothing as worthwhile as that first part.
Yeah.
But like it's but throughout it's very enjoyable.
And that is like one of my favourite moments in Doctor Who, is the TARDIS exploding and they're just spinning.
It's one of my favourite. It's one of my favourite cliffhangers in like definitely the classic series. Just like it's such a great shot of this TARDIS completely exploding and all that.
Yeah, that would be absolutely the best cliffhanger from the serial, because I think the other cliffhangers aren't the best. I would say that's definitely a very good cliffhanger, but then all the others are a bit naff. Like one of them, you have a unicorn running, and you just have close-ups of the unicorn as opposed to coming back to the reactions. It's like, that's so stupid to me.
Yeah, a lot of the time, classic series kind of like cliffhangers feel quite forced, because like they're only there because so we can have a cliffhanger to keep the audience waiting for the next one. But yeah, I do agree. Definitely, a lot of them, particularly like episodes 2 and 3's cliffhangers, just kind of feel like they're just there for the sake of the cliffhanger. When like episode 1, that is generally a great cliffhanger.
Yeah, and I do like how the resolution of the episodes, like in the Power of Three, you have people having heart attacks, and then you have the heart attack people like resurrecting and just standing up, which is a bit stupid. But the thing is, with this story, you have the TARDIS exploding, and then in the final part, you have the TARDIS coming back together, and I think that actually really works. It's like, okay, the whole reality, it kind of feels like, again, a Moffat era story, Journey into the Center of the TARDIS. It feels very cop out, kind of like everything goes back to normal, stuff like that. But in this case, I do think it works, whereas in other cases in Modern Who, it just doesn't, because it's the benefits of being in Classic Who, like there's 5 parts to flesh everything out, whereas in Modern Who you only have 45 minutes, so naturally rushed closes to episodes are more unforgivable, because you have to get that perfect, otherwise it just makes the whole episode feel a bit naff. But because we had so much time to explore the stuff and actually have a bond with the TARDIS coming back, like we want the TARDIS to come back, we want, like in the final part, I was just thinking,
we have time to miss it.
Yeah, I was just thinking in the final part, like, you have 18 minutes in this story, where are we going to go? Because it felt so, at least I felt so doomed for the Doctor. The Doctor was like in a really bad situation, and I thought, how is he going to get out of this one? And then of course the resolution and stuff like that. But yeah, I love this story. I love it. I love how it wraps up. I love everything about it.
Yeah, because I don't know if you know about, like, I think there's a theory that because the next story, the invasion, in like once the TARDIS get us together in the beginning of that story, like you kind of see the Doctor sitting in a chair in a similar position he was in episode 1 of the Mind Robber.
Yeah,
and it's kind of a theory that the events of the whole story was a dream. Which, like, obviously, when you hear that, like, yeah, you never kind of want it to be the story you watch to be a dream, but it definitely makes sense with this one because it's so kind of like weird and sort of just like, it's so much based, so much based was a fantasy. Like, I buy that it could be a dream.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. I'm thinking of that scene now. That was such a really... This episode, well, the serial, I should say, really uses voiceover really well. Like, I know the villain was voiceover. Like, the machine was given a sentient voice, and I think that was pretty cool. And also, just like the Doctor's inner conflicts just playing out during audio as the Doctor's sleeping. I think that's such a fantastic, like, production decision. I think it's very forward-thinking as a serial, and like with concepts, with its execution. I just think it's a bit ahead of its time. Would you guys say?
Yeah, I mean,
because I mean, it's really, I like it a lot. Yeah.
Because I was looking at the reception at the time on Wikipedia, and they were saying that this story overall from the audience had pretty negative results, like feedback, just because it was so complicated. And I can understand, like, at the time that was probably really complicated, but now we're used to complex storytelling, that this is just every day for us.
I can definitely understand the viewpoint, because it's not, because like this episode the story leans way more into kind of the fantasy than the sci-fi that obviously we're so used to with Doctor Who. So I can definitely see people being kind of like weirded out by the story. Because remember, I was telling, because my brother was asking me what like the plot of the episode was, and then I told him basically, and he thought it sounded just so strange, and like he was like, "Well, was it good?" Like, no, yeah, it was really good. It was just but like I think just like to definitely people, I can definitely see people thinking this was kind of too strange of a story, particularly maybe in the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Michael, the other co-host who isn't here today, he finds it a bit silly, the whole concept, and I think, like, yeah, fictional characters coming to life does sound a bit naff, but if we're going to link it to Torchwood now, Torchwood did an episode like exactly that. What's it called? From Out of the Rain? That episode, Joe? I think it is. And that's a pretty good episode as well.
I vaguely know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's the one where they've got like the camera, and then as the like it's the circus people, and the circus people.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, like that's a good episode, and like if you explain the concept to someone else for that episode, they'd think, "Oh, is that good?" And then you think, "Yes, it's actually a good episode." And I just think, like, we have had that in the modern era of the show, so surely going back to rewatching it, you wouldn't find it so silly, and you'd actually find it a bit of it quite charming, because they did it so early. Like, they did this in the 60s with a 60s budget, and like the set design is really great. I find like the castle, the whole like cliff top, like when Jamie's like climbing up the cliff, I just think the use of the sets was superb.
Yeah, like it definitely is very silly, but I don't know, I think it just kind of works. Like they managed to like justify like why there's so much fictional characters in a way that's interesting, of, you know, of getting the kind of writer and kind of creating all this, bringing all these characters to life. So like it is definitely silly, but they do it in such an interesting way. But yeah, I do agree definitely on the sets. There's so much kind of like there's so much imagination to the story that I just really
like
appreciate.
the words, the really massive words that they have to climb up, and then it's like wow, yeah, it's just so interesting, you know.
Yeah, I would have loved to see like a actual angle of the words, like from a high angle, as opposed to just seeing him read it. But I still think it's a nice concept.
Also, the shot looks a little silly because it doesn't really look like it's an actual forest. It just looks like a table of woods. But like, but definitely, I do like the whole concept, and there's just a lot of imagination going on.
Yeah. Now, if you want to go on to sidecast, I said the Gulliver was a fab character and undoubtedly gave us the most memorable and best lines from the serial. You seem to be in an unhappy state. It's definitely one I'll try to use in the future. In the scenes where he was with Troughton, the chemistry between the two shined. And interestingly, Bernard Horsfowl, I believe his name is, who played the character, was also in the War Games as a Time Lord, Taron in Planet of the Daleks, and the Chancellor Goth, which is I think is really cool.
Oh yeah, because I knew I recognised him, but I couldn't place what episodes he was in. Yeah, the War Games, yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
a lot of great episodes.
Yeah, and unfortunately he died rather recently. Actually, it was 2013, so he actually lived quite long. He was like 87, I believe. But yeah, rest in peace. Yeah, I really liked his character. I get why some people may say it was a bit one-dimensional because he was just there just to deliver some, really weird lines, but it was still quite funny.
Kind of the point though, isn't it? That he's one-dimensional because he's, a written character. He can't sort of break his barrier or whatever.
And I think how we saw Zoe and Jamie like repeating the same thing over and over, the fact that he had a chance to actually say some stuff, like some different lines, was actually a really good move, and I really like the character. I think take him out and you don't have many notable side characters except from the children, which I actually placed under my villains category because they're so bloody annoying.
Yeah, I was about to say I found the children characters kind of irritating. There's also Rapunzel as well. What do you think of Rapunzel?
She was fine, yeah, pretty funny. But fine.
Yeah, like fine. I wouldn't say she was good. I think it was a bit of a waste of a character, to be honest. Like we had some backstory to some of these characters, but then Rapunzel was just there for the hair and then asking people if they're a prince. And I think you could have done so much more with her character. You know? What do you think?
Yeah. Oh no, I agree with that.
I agree differently.
Yeah, that was literally my next note. But my last point for sidecast was the Master of the Land of Fiction was a neat little character. His name's Emerus Jones. I think he did quite a good job of performing the evilness, and at the end, old man quirks, like, oh, we're going home. Ooh. I love that little bit just because, that's fun to me.
I really like the whole concept of kind of the villain. And obviously, interestingly, they refer to him as the Master, obviously, before... Yeah. But before the character of the Master was created, but I think it's just an interesting concept, and I do like all that.
Yeah.
Did you ever get the vibe that it was like when I first watched it, I was so convinced that it was going to be the Great Intelligence?
I do definitely know what you mean. He definitely has that kind of definitely that kind of feel to him, doesn't he?
Yeah, and I was wondering if the Master was actually inspired by this character, because it does seem like a very Master thing to do, like trap someone and be in control of the whole proceedings, and which is what this character was. So I think, was the Master inspired by this character? I would be surprised if he wasn't, to be honest with you. In some
I don't know. I can definitely see it.
Yeah.
But I have no idea if that's actually the case.
Like, he reminds me a lot of Derek Jacobi from Utopia, like his general persona, like he's very flamboyant, but then he can also just flip to evil very, very easy. And of course, the resemblance, they do look very similar. But I love the whole concept of the Master. But towards the end, in part 5, like the Doctor becoming the new Master is an interesting concept, but it never really materializes into anything. It's just, I refuse. You have no other alternative for 2 episodes, which I think I could have just went without, you know? Like, the entirety of Part 5 is a bit silly, but I still love it.
Yeah, it's just like they're just thinking of random things, like create Sion de Bergerac, and the Three Musketeers just pops up. Like, it gets a little bit kind of like, I get the sense that like, because it's like based so much in like fantasy and just strangeness, that like there's not really kind of like clear rules set on what you can and can't do. So it's kind of just like, it just, I get the sense that the writer just kind of made just things up, just the climax and the resolution.
When they were doing it, it felt like a kid was writing it in a good way, you know. Like it was just like, oh, there's Blackbeard and Sir Lancelot, and they just fight, and it was silly but fun. You know, it was fine. Fun.
Yeah, again, it's like 60s Who. Like, if you think about the worst productions of classic Who, you have like in the Ark in Space, you have bubble wrap, and this was like in the 70s, the bubble around the hands being like some infection, and I just think, okay, there's that. But then when you go back 10 years, you have such a thrilling story with some fantastic like side cast. Like, you have a horse and you have a unicorn, well, a horse with a unicorn like a horn on, of course, but then you've got all these side characters just coming out of nowhere, and you got some really cool direction. Like, I think the direction in this story was fantastic. And I kind of disagree with your point about the trees. Like, yes, the trees were a bit comical near the start, but then there was a wide shot, and then you could it really looked like a wooden tree, and I thought that was really impressive. But it's just like, to the point that the set design is fantastic, and I think they really outdid themselves for the time as well, and some of it really holds up.
Yeah, definitely. I think it just, the majority of the effects do look good, because there's something so like when you look at 60s sort of Doctor Who, there's something so theatrical about the whole thing. Like, it feels like it could kind of be a stage play almost a lot of the time.
Black and white, like,
and there's that as well. But like just there is just a lot of kind of, particularly in this story, there's just a lot of theatricality to the whole thing, and that I think works for it.
Yeah, and I think the sidecast was superb. I really like the moment where the false face Jamie disappears, and then Zoe runs towards him. There's a bit of smoke, and then it's revealed that it's the cardboard cutout again. I don't know if you guys can recall that scene, but I just think that was fantastic. It was another great moment. And I do like the use of smoke, because they used smoke in the end of part 1 before it transitioned into the credits. It was like in a magic show, you use smoke to create an illusion, and it was like it was very disorientating as a viewer, like the whole, and it was meant to be, you know, like Patrick Troughton on the chair, he's disorientated, and also is it the void? Is that what it's called, the void, where it's just the blackness? Yeah. It's meant to disorientate. The creatures are meant to be a bit weird and wacky, and it's like the smoke just really adds to that, I think. But
it has an atmosphere.
Definitely,
it did create a great atmosphere. But yeah, I find
a lot about 60s Doctor Who, like that has a lot of, the black and white kind of gives it like a lot of atmosphere a lot of the time. Yeah, like, it kind of makes something about the black and white and like the atmosphere makes a lot of kind of classic Doctor Who a lot creepier to me. Like, I do find that a lot of time. I mean, this story is not like that much on the creep factor, but there definitely is, like the tour soldiers and all that do definitely kind of like,
they're effective.
The black and white does work with them.
Yeah, and I think one of you mentioned it earlier, it reminded me a lot of closing time, that's a dreadful episode, Night Terrors, which was like coined to be one of the most scary Doctor Who episodes of all time, like according to Stephen Moffat at the time, I believe he said. And of course, Night Terrors isn't the scariest episode of all time, but I think both of the episodes really work in terms of minimal kind of villain. Like, the villains aren't meant to be like the next Daleks, but it's just like very conservative, and I think that really works in just the scary factor. Less is more.
Yeah, the situation is what is really interesting here. The sort of, like, what the hell is happening, the mystery, and the villains are just, they're all right, but like, I mean, it's the mystery that really is the best thing here.
Yeah, there's just so much tension and really what's going on, particularly earlier on, like.
Yeah, and I really like the moment where Jamie realizes that the creature is saying through this thing in his chest and something, and then it just chucks over his jacket. I really like that moment from Jamie. Like, he deducts something and then he puts that deduction into play. And yes, the villain literally just shakes it off 10 seconds later. But I still think it was a really nice moment, even if it only lasted 10 seconds. But yeah, the special...
Jamie is smarter than I think. He gets smarter, I think, as he goes along, right? I mean, he has a. I wouldn't go as far as to say he has an arc of getting smarter. But he learns. He's very accepting to learn, especially from Zoe and stuff. He's like, oh yeah. No, you're
like him
right,
and the second Doctor have such a good dynamic because Jamie's obviously nowhere near as smart as the Doctor, but he's a lot more physical. And all that. So the two, obviously, the second Doctor in particular isn't really that kind of actiony, and it's when you compare it to someone like Pertwee. But I think they just work so well together. Sort of the Doctor's the brains and Jamie's sort of more of the muscle.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And then just because I think Jamie is probably my favourite Classic Who companion, I'd say. I think he competes with Sarah Jane Smith and Joe Grant as being my absolute favourites, maybe even Ace.
I'm a big fan of Ace. She's my favourite.
Yeah, Ace is the best.
Fair enough. But yeah, Jamie McCrimmon's chemistry with the Doctor was superb, and I think just not just in this episode, but Tomb of the Cybermen and other stories, it's just you can definitely see they liked each other on set. Just watching these episodes back.
It's because isn't that Power of the Daleks the only trans story without Jamie? It's pretty much they've just always been together really, and you can't really imagine second Doctor without Jamie.
They remind me of Shaggy and Scooby-Doo or something like that, Inseparable. When they cuddle each other, they're they grab each other, and I love that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the best kind of Doctor and companions are like that, like some Doctor and Ace, for example, or the 10th Doctor and Donna, where you get the sense kind of them being there makes each other better. I can't. Second Doctor he needs Jamie because that makes him so much better.
And I think it is a testament to the actor as well, because of course the actors in Classic Who tended to leave after 1 or 2 years, companions I'm saying now. And the fact that Jamie stayed for a good 3 years across all of Trowen series is just a testament to how good he was. Because if you just watch all the surviving episodes, you seem to have a new companion every other episode just because there's so much missing. But then whenever you chuck some Trowen on, Jamie is always a recurring factor, and you think, oh crap, yeah. And then you watch the episode, and then you think, I can see why, because he just has a really strong screen presence. And I think that's a testament to Hines. And again, it's a positive to the actor who stood in for him in episode 2 and a part of episode 3. Those are some massive shoes to fill, but he did a really solid job. And I think, yes, it's only the face that's a bit different. It was meant to be different in the story, but he kind of makes the role his own. He gives his own interpretation, whilst also still maintaining the real characteristics of the real Jamie. And I think the actor in question did a fantastic job. And I think I love the character. I could rave on about him all day.
Yeah, same. I absolutely love Jamie.
Yeah. My next note was about the special effects, and it's actually my final note. I undercooked the notes today. But yeah, the special effects of the snakes on Medusa's heads hold up really well. Obviously, no masterpiece, but it's not laughable like some other Classic Who is. But a scene I don't like, or a little bit from the scene I don't like, is Zoe saying, "I've got to see you." That's really weird dialogue. You would die if you looked, so why are you claiming that you have to see what it is?
I think that's a problem a lot, in this, I do have with this story. It's at the end of the second episode with the unicorn, the Doctor establishes that none of these things are real, and if you believe they're not real, then they can't hurt you. But so it kind of feels a bit strange where Zoe wouldn't believe that with Medusa and the Minotaur, and then the Doctor doesn't believe it when it comes to the carcass. It just feels they all know that none of these characters are real, and if they just believe that, then they can't hurt them. So it kind of just feels a bit kind of a strange inconsistency.
Yeah, the Doctor not believing in the carcass is really strange to me.
Yeah,
after he's just been proclaiming that Medusa's not real and that stuff real, and I think, come on, you can do better.
Because the point was he never heard of this character before, so he doesn't know. But if Zoe is saying that, he's a comic character from the year 2000, it's just kind of, it's quite frustrating.
Yeah.
When they keep stuff, so that keeps coming up
as well. it gets old really quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, the cliffhanger, like the first one is the unicorn, and then they resolve it, quite quickly. They're like, oh yeah, and then it just happens again with Medusa, and then it's like, come on, think of something better,
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like, there's just like classic Doctor Who, and it's kind of like forced cliffhangers, really, because just like that scene with Medusa was probably just there for the cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And even then, like, Medusa added absolutely nothing, because you could have had some special effects of like the snakes going across the floor or something like that. But instead, you just have like a grey hand going up towards Zoe's face, and that's it. And I think, oh, come on. Come on. Like, if you made the effort to make the snakes animated, at least actually do something with them. Like, I think it's The Magician's Apprentice or The Witch's Familiar, where that creature can like release snakes and it goes across the floor, and that's really effective horror for me, because I bloody hate snakes. So like, to have something like that in Classic Who would have been superb, and I wish they had thought about that, or maybe they had, but they just didn't execute, which I think was a bit of a mistake, as opposed to just having a grey hand. Ooh. But yeah, I'm actually looking at the audience reception now, and just under a third actually reacted favourably, and
Really?
yeah, and then I personally say just under a third would be it's ridiculous, because how can you watch the story and think this is bad? Like, yes, be confused, but at least try to pick up some of the themes he's trying to go with.
Yeah, is this reactions from the time?
This is reaction from the time, yeah.
Yeah.
So I can understand,
like,
kind of.
Yeah, so it's what we were saying, like, it's just such a strange story that we can understand maybe people didn't quite expect it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, well, it's saying here, one of Michael's criticisms, or kind of just points that he made to me privately, and it's kind of echoed with the audience reaction. People disliked the more fantasy orientated story rather than the more dignified science fiction. So it's more of a case of they've tried something new, and at the time at least it didn't really work for some people, and they just want like robots and space and stuff like that. Then you have robots, you have like sci-fi villains in this, and I think, yes, they're not the best, but you still got some sci-fi elements. You've got the creature at the end, not the creature, you've just got the big hive mind computer at the end with the really creepy voice with the plot to take over Earth. Like, that's a really good plot, and you've got some really interesting concepts around it. How can you be not confused? I can understand why you're a bit confused. I was a bit confused at times, like, what's going on? But it's still like, how can you like brush this off as not science fiction? It is science fiction, at least for me.
Yeah, well, yeah, they say that they're in a whole another like universe or something like that,
Yeah.
and like nothing is impossible, and it's just very experimental, And I love when Doctor Who goes experimental.
And that's quite rare for the classic series to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, usually the Siege or something like that.
Because like, obviously the story before this, the Dominators, is like just your most standard generic kind of Doctor Who story. So it's just like, it's just nice to get something like this, which is so weird. But like, as we keep saying, like, it feels like something that we would get in like the Matt Smith era, like Series 5, Series 6 kind of. I can really imagine this. Like, because obviously, like, it's stuff like the Pandora opens with the TARDIS exploding, kinda feels like it's like it's harkening back to this.
Yeah.
That's why I said it was like really forward thinking, because there are so many stories we've alluded to today where it's kind of like you can see if it was inspired by this story. Like, this story is probably inspires several modern Who episodes, and you just think, or at least they resemble it. So I just think that's really impressive that they could do that. Like, some people say the Web Planet is a dreadful episode in my opinion, but some people will like praise it for having some concepts that are revisited. But then I just watch it and I think, what concepts? But in this episode, it's like a sore thumb. You can see the concepts from a mile away.
I think I always appreciate it with classic Doctor Who, because obviously they don't have the best budget in the world. I always appreciate when they just kind of like have that and like, oh, we'll do it anyway. We have these kind of crazy concepts and we don't have the most money or the best kind of effects, but we're going to do it anyway because it's a good story and a good concept. And that's something I always appreciate about classic Doctor Who, particularly in stories like this.
Yeah,
like the mind robber, like, it stands out, I think, in like classic Doctor Who as sort of like being very different to all the other ones. Like, there's nothing else quite like it. I mean, I can't think of everything, and whether or not you like it, it does stand out. And I'd rather more episodes like this than sort of just generic like rubbish like that would come later.
I mean, they went back to the bug-eyed monster concept within a series of the Sidney Newman saying no bug-eyed monsters. So it's like it just falls back on a lot of sci-fi tropes a lot of the time. So the fact that they did something different, it was superb, and I think execution-wise, it absolutely paid off, because as an episode, if you watched it on its own, and the serial on its own, even each episode as a standalone episode, they just work on its own. Like, you could literally just chuck part 4 on without the context of the first 3 parts, and you think, oh crap, this is actually quite nice to follow along with, and it gets you thinking.
Yeah. Episode 1 in particular is just like that feels kind of like so like isolated from the rest of the story, because it's just so different. But like, yeah, I definitely agree with you on that.
It reminds me a lot of The Edge of Destruction, the first Doctor serial.
You know what? When I was watching the first part of the Man Robot, I was thinking of The Edge of Destruction, and like I personally do actually quite enjoy that story, and because of just like I was just in the top. Yeah, I do quite like it, because I just like in the story, it's just in the TARDIS, and it's very kind of contained.
Yeah,
and there's just a lot of tension. To me, there's a lot of tension to that.
Yeah.
Some of the best stories are like that, like Midnight. I like Midnight so much, and when you have restrictions or like you're like, okay, let's to a lesser extent, the journey to the center of the TARDIS. Like, I don't like that one at all, but the concept for that is amazing, and like in the Invasion of Time, when they go into the TARDIS, they don't do that.
And they don't realize it well, don't they? When they're in Invasion of Time.
Yeah, I can't believe Moffat watched the Invasion of Time and thought, I can do better than this, then produce Journey to the Center of the TARDIS. That's embarrassing. But yeah, it did remind me of The Edge of Destruction, and I think this is better than The Edge of Destruction in terms of part 1. Yes, that's the part most like The Edge of Destruction, but I would still say, despite it not being the best part of this serial, in my opinion, I know you would disagree, guys, but it is definitely superior still over The Edge of Destruction, which I think is, again, alright, mediocre. So I think anything above a 5 out of 10 for part 1 would make it better. And I think Troughton, I've been rewatching Classic Who recently, and I've got to say, quite controversially, I kind of like William Hartnell more than Troughton. I don't know what you guys think.
Interesting.
But to me, Hartnell has fantastic screen presence, and makes every scene he's in his own, even if he like fumbles it across some of his lines. But I think it may just be the old man shouting like that makes me think, okay, yeah, he's shouting, he's in control of this room. Whereas with Troughton, it's more of a case of he's in the background, but then when he's calling into the action, he's fantastic. So they're very different in that case.
Hartnell definitely has a screen presence, because I remember like it took me so long to get around to watching a Hartnell episode, because I always assumed I was going to find him like the boring one. But like, I remember when I gave him a chance, I really taken to him. Like he's not my favourite kind of Doctor, and I do prefer Troughton, but like, yeah, I do love Hartnell's kind of like the authority that it has, because when you say like Troughton's someone who's more in the background, to me that's my issue with some Doctors like Peter Davison or Jodie Whittaker. It's just kind of like you're just kind of like too kind of normal for me, where you kind of feel like you kind of blend in the background, when I prefer the kind of Doctors to be like, to stand out, be like the most important, or feel like he's the most important one in the room.
Yeah, it's like when you mentioned Whittaker there, it's like in the Witchfinders, where the focus for a solid 10 minutes is just on the companions and the sidecast having a chat, but then out of nowhere the Doctor comes in and like, oh, I'm here, and I just think, oh wow, you've actually made yourself known. It's as if the writers like just know they've done some disservice to the Doctor, so like, oh, here we go, here's the Doctor again. So I can definitely understand that, just because I think the writers do a discredit to her and Davidson in the 5 Doctors. I think Davidson is so wasted. Like, all of them are in the death zone, and then he's just in the place with the Time Lords, and I just think, what a waste.
I find that with Peter Davison just throughout his era, really, just kind of feel like, oh, you could have been like, he's just kind of underused until you get to the Caves of Amjazani, where he just kind of explodes, and I'm just like, well, where was this the entire TW era? And like, oh, now you're finally getting it. You've gone, and to me that's one of my biggest kind of frustrations in like all of Doctor Who, is just kind of Peter Davison for me, as soon as he becomes really comfortable with the role, he's gone.
Yeah.
And like, which is a shame.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think with Troughton, I think he's such a fantastic actor. Like, Hartnell literally chose Troughton to be his replacement, and I do think Troughton's still my top 3 classic Who Doctors, along with 2 alongside with 3 and 4. This would be my top 3. So it's really weird because it's kind of the symmetry. Like in classic Who, my favorite Doctors are 2, 3, and 4. And then in modern Who, my favourite Doctors are 10, 11, and 12. So it's like you forget the first Doctor in each era, and you forget the others, and you just think those 3. And I think it peaked too early, I think.
What do you think about McCoy? Because McCoy is very similar to Troughton.
Yeah, McCoy is like one of my favorite Doctors. But,
McCoy has more screen presence than Troughton. I'll give him that. In terms of Troughton is fine, like in the background, he has no issue with that. But then McCoy is always seems to be front and center, but has the same characteristics as the second Doctor, if that makes sense. So yes, they're very similar Doctors, but I think Sylvester McCoy gets himself out there, even if he doesn't have so much dialogue as others. I do like him.
Yeah, but if you think about it, like with Troughton, if it wasn't for him, and his performance working so well, we wouldn't have Doctor Who past the 60s.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot to owe, kind of Hartnell as well, definitely, but there's just so much to owe to Troughton for like just kicking off, like, or like just like, because if he didn't work, Doctor Who wouldn't have lasted anywhere near as long as it did.
No.
Definitely.
So yeah, I did put out a tweet yesterday just saying thoughts on the Mind Robber. Like, we make a point of not revealing what the episode we're going to be reviewing for the next week on the podcast until we actually release the episode, but you know, I'm impatient and I just tweeted it. So I did get quite a few responses, and I just had thoughts on the Mind Robbers, and Michael said, "I'm thinking, bear with me, that it involves a robber of minds." And I thought, why? And I just put a reaction. He's not wrong. But yeah, there were some other replies. Thomas Hines said, "A great and fun Troughton story. There are some scenes that creep me out a little. I love it. 10 out of 10. Most of these are like 10 out of 10s. This is crazy." WM said 10 out of 10. Love a batshit crazy and creative story. Fenric fan said 10 out of 10. Probably the most batshit story. Again, the same terminology of at least the classic series, and I utterly love it. Joel Patterson said 10 out of 10. One of my favourites. Pure bonkers brilliance.
A lot of 10 out of 10s. So I wasn't expecting that.
No, neither was I. Mr. Dr. Gilmore, like, it's a really great story, but I still think there's like 1 or 2 little things that kind of just decrease my score a little bit because it's not
definitely.
perfect.
Definitely, like it's a great story, the one I really enjoy, but I personally wouldn't say it's up there in terms of the best Troughton stories. Like, I wouldn't put it with like Team of the Cybermen or Enemy of the World or stories like that.
Yeah,
or War Games.
Just above average for me, I think.
Ooh.
For him.
Yeah.
For Troughton, yeah. I mean, yeah. He's good in it, but yeah, I don't know. Troughton's got so many great ones that just compared to this, doesn't stand close.
Yeah. And again, back to the point about who I prefer, McCoy or Troughton. It would definitely be Troughton any day of the week, just because Troughton's got so many great stories compared to McCoy. Yes, I like McCoy, but Troughton's got so many fantastic stories. Like, I was thinking back just a few days ago, and I realised the 10th Doctor, like 11th Doctor is my favourite Doctor. I don't know if you guys knew, but he is. But looking back at it, I just think the 10th Doctor has so many great stories compared to the first half of the Moffat era with Smith, and I just think like that just shows the capability of Smith in terms of leaving his presence be known, even if his stories weren't great, if that makes sense. Like, Tennant had the same amount of episodes, but he still had the better ones. Like with
Capaldi, I think Capaldi is great, but his episodes are usually not very great. But there's very few great ones with Capaldi, but he's always great. Just the stories let him down. Whereas like some of the other Doctors, it's the opposite, you know, like Davison or Baker or something like that.
Absolutely. Like in those cases, the story complements the actor more times than not. But yeah, Mr. Dr. Gilmore said favorite classic Who story in combat with the series 10. I'm guessing that's season 10 finale as my all-time. Actually, no. I misinterpreted that. So he says, or she says, or whoever, favorite classic Who story in combat with the S10 finale as my all-time favorite. So that must mean Modern Who series 10 finale.
Yeah, I think that's what it means. Yeah, Wars Enough in Time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's both two very good stories there. I personally say the latter is better, like the series 10 finale. That's just superb.
Yeah, both great in my opinion.
Hashtag lock Trump up, aka Paul Morris, said one of the best. Simple as that. Who Station said a tad overrated but good nonetheless. Would you guys agree with that sentiment? Is it good?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
I think it's very good. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. And then the Celestial Toy Gazer says overrated mess. And then I did ask any specific moments you take issue with. And then they said when the Doctor is tricked into the fake TARDIS, like he knows Jamie and Zoe are hypnotized and can't be trusted, and yet all of a sudden he completely disregards this. That's interesting.
I do know what it means though. I found that part a little bit kind of silly.
I liked it personally, and I do agree with the point that I don't know why he trusts them so easily, but then again in that scene they were portraying their characters as not hypnotized, if you know what I mean. Like when they're hypnotized they're very one-dimensional, but then all of a sudden they're not one-dimensional, so I guess that's like a writing or directing kind of mistake there, but I still do think it works for me personally.
Yeah, it's just how the Doctor would just completely put all his trust in them and all that, like particularly when he knows the TARDIS has blown up. Like, it's not a huge knock against the story, but like I do know what we mean to do. I did think that. Yeah,
fair enough. But yeah, that wraps up the audience interaction part of this episode. Do you guys have conclusions and a score out of 10? And who would like to go first? George, maybe?
The mind, Robert. The more I think about it, the more my opinion changes on it. You know. It's a tough one because, like, on one hand, like the first episode for me is a 10 out of 10 without a doubt. Love it, great. The others are good, like really good, but they do gradually get worse for me. I think because the conclusion and the sort of it just doesn't satisfy me, you know, because they set up so many like interesting things, like them being lured out into like this unknown world, you know, like they all see their homes and stuff, but then that never gets brought up ever again. They never get lured anywhere else, and it's like and it's just like it's a writer making up this sort of amazing world, and it's like that's good, but you know it's not really what I want, what I wanted from the story. So it let me down a bit. But yeah, Troughton, Jamie, everyone great. So I would say it's above average, but yeah, I don't know. I'd probably give it out of 10, probably a 7.5.
7.5, okay. That's higher than expected, to be honest. The way you hype
George is always very harsh.
I'm very harsh when it comes to things I like for some reason. I don't know why. I'm going to scrap that, actually. Just do a 7 out of 10.
Just a 7. I shouldn't have said that. Fair enough. Joe?
Well, I feel a bit more positive on the story overall. Like, I do agree that the first part is the best part, but like, this how much I just really like that first part. There's just so much kind of tension and mystery to the whole thing, and it's unique, kind of stands out. And once we do get into the rest of the story, it's still good, but just in my opinion, nothing kind of tops that really great first part. But yeah, it's entertaining throughout. It's engaging. Like, the TARDIS team itself are great as always, even Zoe's annoying screaming. But like, but yeah, just so much imagination and kind of creativity throughout the whole thing. And yeah, some moments stand out as kind of like sillier. Some moments don't really work. But I think overall it is a very enjoyable story, which I did have a great time rewatching. I would give it an 8 out of 10 personally.
8 out of 10. Okay, I guess I'm going to be the most positive score for this episode, at least. Again, feels like very much like a Moffat type story, which is probably why I do enjoy it so much. It's got complex themes that I could watch any time of day, and for the most part, it does lead to some really gripping television that never left me bored once. I think that may be to do with the shortened runtime. Like Classic Who can drag a tiny bit if it's got several parts, but this one definitely didn't drag.
Yeah, I agree with that, definitely.
Yeah.
It was really well paced, well executed, and well told. 3 of the 5 parts would be an easy 10 out of 10 for me, whereas the other 2 would be given a 5.5 and a 7. So that kind of averages to a 5.8, no, an 8.5 out of 10 overall, which is my final
See,
score.
like, I suppose for you, because like maybe you're the highest out of the 3 of us, because for you the story gets kind of better as it goes along, when for us it gets a little weaker as it goes on.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe I do have to give the first part a go. It's just because the first part sets a lot of stuff up, but then the rest of it kind of builds or like actually makes those concepts realized, if that makes sense. Just like, okay, you've set it up and now we're actually going to explore it, and I think it explored it really well, and that's what I want to have from a story more than just set up. But yeah, maybe that's just me, but the first part was still serviceable. I still did like it. So none of the parts would fall on the mediocre to bad range for me. All of them are at least solid. So yeah,
Definitely. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. So for the next episode is going to be Michael, Andy, and Phil, who's going to be our guest next week. And so we have to do something before we do wrap this up. We have to spin the wheel. So I'm going to quickly spin the wheel with the episodes that are on the wheel for this week. And it's spinning. Ooh, speaking of McCoy, it's a McCoy episode. It is The Curse of Fenric. What an episode, guys.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
That's top 10, top 5, yeah. Great.
Yeah. No pressure on giving a high rating, guys, if you are listening to this before you record. But yeah, that's for next week. Guys, thank you so much. You've been superb. Thanks, George, for taking the day off work to do this, which is at least now you've got the afternoon just to chill and do whatever you need to do, you know?
Yeah, I might watch some more Doctor Who knows?
Yeah, oh god, I have to watch Batman and Robin for another podcast, which is super.
Unlucky you.
Yeah, I do that this afternoon on my day off, so for God's sake. But yeah, Joe as well, super.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It was your choice in episode, wasn't it? It was on your list of 5.
It was a mine, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad you chose it, even though I would have loved to do Countryside as well, but I think this was a great substitute. So yeah, if you guys ever want to come on again, you're more than welcome for the next round of episodes.
Yeah, be happy to.
Yeah, but yeah, thank you guys for coming on, and thank you all of you for listening. Until next time, peace out. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.